I'd like to start with a reflection from John O'Donoghue, which is a kind of prayer, but it feeds into what Penny's going to say. It's called For a New Beginning. In out-of-the-way places of the heart, where your thoughts never think to wander, this beginning has been quietly forming, waiting until you are ready to emerge. For a long time it has watched your desire, feeling the emptiness grow within you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what you had outgrown. It watched you play with the seduction of safety and the grey promises that sameness whispered. Heard the waves of turmoil rise and relent, wondered, would you always live like this? Then the delight, when your courage kindled, and out you stepped onto new ground, your eyes young again with energy and dream, a path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning that is at one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure. Hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Soon you will be home in a new rhythm. For your soul senses that the world awaits you, as Joan Chittister said. So I'd like to welcome Penny Brown here for her input to Flourish and Thrive from the inside. Penny is a very experienced mental health professional who has worked with both adults and children and has recently retired from private practice but continues to work in the South East London Community Health Service. Turns out that Penny and I are almost twins, having been born either side of the Pennines in the late 1940s. We have different backgrounds but arrived at the same point when we joined Catholic Women's Network, Penny 10 years earlier than me. Penny has written about her experiences as a child and young person when she felt like the church was interested only in controlling the laity rather than supporting their spiritual well-being. Penny took her own path and joined the activist movement. Through linking with others in Catholic Women's Network who told their stories, from nuns to laywomen of all varieties, Penny experienced a profound sharing and was able to participate fully in alternative liturgies. Last year, Penny, in her professional capacity, has had dealings with the church authorities, which brought her into contact with abusive attitudes and behaviour of some of these authorities. We hold you in prayer, Penny, as you lead us through your talk. Over to you.
Thank you, Sue. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this. And you asked me to follow Mary, Joan and Tony. And I think that's probably about the most difficult position to be in. So I'm not very used to talking about the church or knowing where you are with the church or what's been happening really the last 30 years, because I was an activist, but I decided to leave the church and I never looked back from that decision. So it's been very difficult on the one hand to keep up with what you've been doing, where the church has got to and what Root and Branch has been doing. But what I do know about and what I wanted to bring here was some of the observations I've got about the dynamics that go on in institutions like the Catholic Church. And not just that they affect us in terms of our politics, our need for justice, for women's rights, or whatever the issue are, but that they affect us inside ourselves. And I want to start today first by making a few comments and observations about that for you to consider, because what will be important in this session, I think, is what you want to talk about and what you can relate to or what you make of what I say. So it's a new experience for me. I don't know what will happen here, right? And I don't know what you're going to say and how you will comment, but I think that that is a very root and branch way of working. One of the things I noticed about root and branch, which I've only been connected with this year, is that it's the only Catholic place, apart from the Catholic Women's Network that I was involved in, that actually is interested in not knowing what the next stage is, the next phase is, asking questions, the questions, how do we empower ourselves? How do we flourish and thrive? Asking questions. And I think this is quite new in the Catholic culture, where, as we heard from Tony, everything fixed and set, and there's no argument. So let me say to you, coming to this group, I think that the way that you work is wonderful, because that is what will take us forward in the spirit. The not knowing, seeing what happened, and so on. So this is what we're going to do today, and we'll see. So I'm going to just go through some comments, observations, if you like, because I haven't turned it into the kind of presentation that people who are used to doing this thing can do. So bear with me, right? So I do feel very privileged to be here, having only been connected with Root and Branch for a very short time. And I would really like to say thank you for the welcome that you've given me. I do feel quite at home in this group, having been here just a short time. So we'll go on. Now, I want to talk about feelings, our emotions, because it strikes me that this is something that's never been talked about much in the context of the church. Would you agree with that? Yeah. And interestingly enough, I asked a priest that I knew recently, I said, out of curiosity, can I ask you what you were taught in the seminary about feelings? And he said, don't have them. And I thought that was very telling. We could talk about that actually, couldn't we? But it'll take us off emotions. But my work is all about feelings, is all about emotions. So I suppose I feel that there are all kinds of things I take for granted in my work. But nobody ever, unless you come for therapy or counselling, nobody ever kind of knows about it. Working as a psychotherapist has given me a very different perspective about human beings and human behaviour and human feelings than the one I was given growing up a Catholic. So my focus is going to be on the inner life, your inner life, mine, and what happens to us when we're having to cope with an institution like the Catholic Church. So basically I spend my time trying to help people to move through pain and suffering and to help them live fuller and more fulfilling lives. And this work's about understanding people's feelings. So coming to the subject of empowerment, I'm coming from that particular point of view. I think experience has shown me that it's our emotional life, our feelings, that have a far greater impact on our well-being than our thoughts do. And we know that many Catholics have very hurt feelings about what has happened to them in their relationship with the Catholic Church. And they find themselves in all sorts of dilemmas and difficulties about what to do, about how they feel. I remember being very confused as a child about the teaching about feelings, because it seemed to me that we were taught that awful lot of feelings were sins. If you were angry, it's a sin. If you went out, slept with the wrong person, it's a sin. If you're jealous, it's a sin. And I raised this once with a priest and said, you know, is that true that we, as Catholics, we were taught that feelings were sins? And he said, oh, no, feelings aren't sins. They're occasions of sins. Right? And I actually found that far too difficult to understand, because when you got into the confessional, that's not how you were spoken to. Yeah? What you was, you know, you said, oh, what did we say as kids? You know, I didn't do what my mum told me to do. You know, well, you get something like, well, Our Lady wouldn't have done that. You know, it was that kind of idea that actually how you felt was sinful in itself. So it was only when I was really training that I had this revelation that there was this whole other world where people thought feelings were actually really good. And that not only were they good, they were a good guide to reality. And so a whole new world opened up, and I think that might have been part of my not minding much when I actually decided not to stay in the church, because I was given a different view. The bottom line is, if our feelings are hurt, if we're distressed, if bad things have happened to us, we just cannot thrive. And coping with that kind of distress burns up an enormous amount of energy in us. So I wanted to start with making a few very specific observations to consider about why being a Catholic has had such a major impact, a really powerful impact on our emotions, all of us. And I thought it was quite interesting, Tony, when you were talking. You know, when you were talking, we were talking about death, which is a very Catholic subject when we were growing up. You mentioned that even something that we were told when we were very tiny and what they grew up with never went away. It was always there. It was always in us. So I wanted to look at what a psychotherapist would talk about that massive sense of belonging that we have to the Catholic Church. I think it's one of those things that people who are not Catholics wonder about. A person might not go near a Catholic church for 50 years, but when they go for the hospital operation, they put down on the form Catholic. It never leaves us. And I'd like to just talk a little bit. I've got notes everywhere, you can see, but you'll have to bear with me on this. I'd like to start with thinking about what it is about that that's so strong in us, that even when whatever the Catholic Church does or is, we still want to belong to it. I suppose that it's our home, it's our spiritual roots, it's who we are. It's this sense of belonging that binds us to the Catholic heritage and traditions. It's part of our identity, if you like. In psychological terms, when we call ourselves Catholic, we're saying we are attached to the church. And not just in the outside everyday world of knowing the prayers or going to Mass, but attached inside ourselves. The meaning that the church has for us becomes part of our inner life and has a powerful hold on our feelings. So let me say a little bit more about this idea of attachment. The need for safe attachments is a fundamental human need. At birth, a baby cannot survive without a secure attachment from a loving and responsible carer. If we're lucky, our most significant emotional attachments as we grow up is to our family. But as adults too, our emotional need for safety and secure attachments goes on in our relationships with friends, partners, and maybe even the town where we live, or our local community, or even the football club we choose to support. Whatever brings a sense of belonging, positive identity and connection to us, to others, and without good emotional attachments, positive ones, we tend not to thrive. We all need to be treated well, to be known and respected for who we are in order to flourish. We make significant emotional investments in all our attachments, and we grieve for them if we lose them. So to say we are attached within to the Catholic Church is no small thing, as we've so much emotion and need invested in it. Even the language we use is the language of attachment. It's the familiar language of family. We talk about Mother Church, the Holy Father. We address ordained priests as father, nuns as sister. The Church presents us with another experience of family, a spiritual family. But the difficulty that we have with that is that we, the laity, have been cast as the children in the family. Not grown up enough to take responsibility for ourselves, and needing very clear rules and regulations to keep us on line. Having invested so much of ourselves in the church, it wounds our feelings when we're treated disrespectfully, when we hear about uncaring and sometimes abusive behaviour from people in positions of power, when we hear our most intimate relationships denigrated, when women aren't allowed to bring their gifts of ministry to the church, and when people's vulnerabilities are exploited, and when the church authorities tell us that only they know the truth about God, then we lose a sense of safety and belonging and welcome in our spiritual home. And we begin to question whether we can stay in such a painful place, or whether we can face leaving into the unknown, isolating ourselves from everything that we've known before, a prospect which is in fact very frightening. The more we have invested in the church, the more devastating is the loss of trust in it. We feel shock, anger, sometimes even trauma, and a painful sense of loss that something good in our lives that we valued is no longer a place we can feel comfortable in. It also sets up a difficult conflict in us. Because when we hear things about the church, or whether we experience bad things ourselves and harmful things ourselves, it puts us in a position where we have to choose in some way between our own personal integrity and still feeling that we actually belong there. And coming back to the idea of the church as a family, from the point of view of the therapies, it's an incredibly dysfunctional one. If we have a think about that, who's the head of the house? Who runs it? Who's in control? It's father. Yeah? It might be mother as well, but it's usually father and mother, or perhaps not. It's better to think of it as father, because we're used to that. We're the children there. All the love in the house is dependent on obedience. And what will happen to us if we don't live by father's rules? We can be asked not to share the family dinner, or at the worst, shown the door, or we can be locked in our room and not allowed to be who we are. It's a very difficult situation for us. And I don't know how you individually deal with those sorts of dilemmas inside yourself, and perhaps we could talk about that a bit later on. I think you can say as well that it's an abusive family. If the church were to go into family therapy, we'd have a lot to say about what goes on in that house. Yeah. For a start, the children aren't allowed to grow up. They're not allowed to develop the skills that they need to actually cope with life and the world. And they're certainly not allowed to spiritually develop on their own. The rules are there, and you know, that's the choice. You either obey them or you don't. Now, we have a word for, a phrase for the kind of power that there is over us in the church. It's called coercive control. And I'm sure you're familiar with that, because it's actually been one of those things that's been talked about quite a lot. I think it was a storyline on The Archers quite recently. And the whole country was very aware of what coercive control was. It's basically a continuous pattern of behaviour that's intended to exert power and control over others. And just as we internalise, we take into ourselves, it becomes part of us, that sense of belonging I was talking about. We also internalise a bit of that father, the controlling one, right inside us. So even when we're not there, if you like, even if we're not at Mass or we're not taking part in some Catholic activity, it's still there. It's still there inside us. And it's a controlling and it's an abusive father. We take into ourselves a fear of punishment. And it gets inside us so that we will police our own thoughts and feelings. We don't need controlling from the inside. We do it ourselves with our obedience to that voice inside us. And the strength of that voice is huge. I mean, we heard that this morning in lots of the contributions in the session about how difficult it is to get free of that in some way. Because even if we can see quite rationally that something is so, something is true, it doesn't mean that we feel it. We can have two things going on at once inside us. And to some extent, which is probably a bit harsh, but you can come back to me on this, in some senses, when we still have that bit inside us and haven't got rid of it, we are kind of colluding with it. We're giving our power away. We're allowing it to happen. Because to not allow it to happen actually feels quite uncomfortable. Now, I hesitated about saying that to you, that we colluded with it, because I didn't want anything else for you to be guilty about. But because it, you know, we've got enough already to carry. But it's an interesting dynamic, because like the abused child in the family, we think it's our fault. However much rationally we know that we're trying to change things and do things, there's a bit of us that thinks, you know, we shouldn't be doing it. We unconsciously absorb it. Now, the thing about coercive control is we're not given in that situation the opportunity to trust ourselves. And I think this comes up again and again when you're thinking about change, or what kind of spiritual community does Root and Branch want to bring through. Do we trust ourselves? Do you trust yourselves to make a community that is going to be very different from the institutional church as it is now? I found a wonderful quote from Richard Rohr. I don't know how many of you are, me too, every day. Richard Rohr describes this feeling himself. He says, and I'm going to quote this, "We feel the pull of the church authorities inside us, and we filter our thinking and behaviour towards what we've been taught is permissible, rather than following the nudges of our conscience." And I thought the nudges of our conscience was a wonderful way of describing it. Because when I said at the beginning about process, that you know how to let the process go, the direction in which it goes is often because of the nudges. Not clear quite what it is, but there's a nudge that way or not that way. Now, what I would like to ask you, and this is because I don't know the answer, I don't know the answer to lots of things, but I really don't know the answer to this. I know, and we've heard from Tony this morning, that nuns, priests, people in religious orders under the authority of the Vatican have real threats against them when things are said and done that the Vatican doesn't like. But I'd like to ask you the question, what are the threats for the laity? Am I allowed to take a comment?
Are we allowed to take comments?
Why not?
Okay.
Go on.
Let's keep them short because of the
I don't want to interrupt your
acoustics.
No. What are the threats? I don't know the answer. Yes.
Loss of ministry. If you've got a wee ministry and you don't obey the wee ministry.
Excommunication.
Right.
That's happened to lay people as well.
Right.
Loss of job. We couldn't hear.
Loss of job.
Loss of job. Loss of job. Yeah.
Spike will
Hello,
run the roving mic.
Yeah.
So we had
Pass
loss
it
of
on.
job, we
Yeah.
had excommunication,
Yeah.
and loss of ministry.
Yeah.
Loss of standing.
Right. So if you are connected in some way with the institutional church, that is the sanction. That is the sanction. What do you think the sanction is for just a member of the congregation that hasn't got any of those links?
Exclusion from the community in some way.
Yes, I think that's it. And that's the fear, that's the punishment. That you will have a massive loss in your life, not just of the regular Catholic routine, but a massive loss of your friends or your family, or you're at odds with your family. You know, these are real threats. Thank you for that, because I would wanted to ask you that.
Sorry, if I move on, could I make another point?
Yes, do.
If we all have this, no, for the people that have this deep attachment inside that is not of our choice, it's there.
Yeah.
We would lose ourselves. We would lose a part of ourselves.
Yes. That's a very good point. Because what you're saying so eloquently, really, is that when things change, there are losses as well as gains in every way. So I think that's absolutely spot on. Thank you. Yeah. But this, sorry, I can't. Jill, yeah. What Jill is saying is that there are some gains, you see, to keeping that bit of ourselves. What I'm saying is, how you manage that is up to each individual. But what I'm saying is, what's empowering is to know your enemy. Right? Know your enemy, because it stops you being free. And free to make a choice about whether it's worth it or not. So now you've looked it in the eye, I hope it might be something that you can talk about when the time's right. So the point I'm really making there is that when you're working to bring a different kind of spiritual community into existence, it may be clear to you that, to your rational self, what should, I don't like the word, but we'll come to that in a minute, should be done. But your feelings can pull you in a totally different direction, and that is disempowering. So we've got a difficulty about how we manage those two things that are going on inside us. I think in any community of equals, some of those feelings would need to be healed. And we would need one another to do that. So, how do we heal feelings, is the question that comes up. And I think we have got a model in psychotherapy of what works. You don't have to go into therapy, I hasten to ask, add to that. We've got a model of what works, because the last 100 years we've discovered that talking about how we feel and being listened to and truly heard is itself healing and empowering. That's all that's needed. It's not magical. It's not because you know more than the next person. It's that you're able to do something. You're able to talk about how you truly feel, and you need to listen to how other people feel. And that, in its sense, if that goes right, That is the alchemy for healing and empowering ourselves. Now, sadly, we can't heal feelings simply by thinking about them. We can't stop ourselves being sad or jealous or guilty or angry just because in our thinking self we'd like to do that. We'd like to do that. But we heal when we talk and share and are heard by another. So I was very pleased when I saw the layout of what was going to happen over this weekend, that part of the weekend would be given over to hearing people's stories. Because that's the kind of healing that I'm talking about. I'm talking about healing work. And when that happens this afternoon, that's what that is in terms of our inside self. We all know that, well, by our very faith, we're used to the idea that new life can arise out of pain and suffering and a feeling of deadness. So I think after lunch, we're all going to have an experience of that healing work. What it's like to listen to another person really attentively and be really present, and what it's like for them to be able to open up and share with us. We've got a model too of what people need in that space of sharing. We need to talk freely and honestly about our own lives, our own journey, and the feelings that we have. We need to be able to trust who we're talking to, and we need not to be judged. We need to be understood and held safely. We want our experience to be welcomed and respected. We don't want to be told what to do or what they did or how helpful this idea is, or, you know, shouldn't be doing that, maybe this. They need to be told that their experience is their experience, and the journey is to find out what's right for them. What's personal integrity for them, what's authenticity for them. And maybe, without intruding too far, offering a few possibilities, perspectives, choices that they might not have thought about. So, I doubt it's a surprise to you that I believe empowerment begins with knowing more about our feelings. I was thinking when I wrote down empowerment begins with self-awareness that it was like an advert, you know, that you would see. Empowerment begins with self-awareness, but it does raise the question, well, what on earth is self-awareness? And I'm going to suggest something to you which I think is certainly how I work with people. As I said earlier, I think we've been given the most enormous suspicion of our feelings. If you've ever had a thought that I shouldn't be feeling that, right, then the messages are old ones that come into you from an older time, and ones which actually you've outgrown, yeah? Because what I'm going to say about feelings is this. Feelings just are. And the thing about them is, we don't choose them, they just come to us, right? And unlike the mixed messages we got from the church, they're completely morally neutral. They just are. You know, you can sit there and think, well, I feel like murdering somebody. What I feel is that if you can take an interest in your feelings rather than judging them, this is the beginning of really being more aware of yourself. I wonder how easy it is for any of us to name feelings, because when I first went into training, I only knew about 4 feelings. There was mad, glad, sad, and bad. What else was there? But in fact, our range, the range of feelings that we're capable of, is absolutely enormous. And it seems that all human beings share the same potential for the same feelings. So sort of bad people in the canon are not people that don't feel those things. They do, and if they say they don't, they're fibbing. So, you know, it's a piece of humanity that we share. We just have feelings, and they come out of nowhere sometimes. And I have to say, sometimes they're very inconvenient. You know, you go for family Christmas. You know, you don't want to feel like that about your sister-in-law, but every time she opens her mouth, you do. And you go, you know, and just have a little walk around the garden and not listen to it. Now, I think in the old Catholic view, there'd be some tutting about that. Whereas, from the point of view of the psychotherapist, it's interesting. It's really interesting. So, I actually think that the ability to do that well is the beginning of a whole chain of change inside you. Because you will know more about yourself if you can do that, if you can name how you feel, and not be frightened of looking at it, because we have been encouraged to be good and have good thoughts. That's the other thing, good thoughts, instead of authentic thoughts. And I think it was Father Nick Postlethwaite who brought up at one of the last meetings, suggested, didn't he? We need to have authentic conversations with one another in order to build the community. But it's very difficult to have authentic conversations if you don't know how authentic you are, if you follow that logic. So, you know, I think it's something for us to think about. So, I think it's new skills. I put it as new skills for new times. If we're going to have a welcoming, open, inclusive community, then it's going to be important to understand other people's feelings as well and why they have them. So I think we need to build on some of our skills, really, to understand the difference between thinking and feeling, which was another thing I didn't. Do we all understand the difference between thinking and feeling? No? Well, I'll give you a good example, right? You know that flying is the safest form of travel, right? You're quite happy. And then the plane stands on the runway and the engine tone roars up. And you wish you hadn't come because you're feeling frightened. You know it's safe, but you're feeling frightened. That's the difference. Is that clear? Yeah. We can't control it. We just can't control it. So you might as well just find it interesting. Yeah? I think it would be an important thing as well for helping us with the dynamics of a group, because there's a lot to learn about a group, and there are lots of pitfalls to avoid and so on. And I just don't think we should be, frightened about exploring feelings with others, if we can manage that. I think that's the fundamental difference between sitting in the pews and never having any contact with anyone else, and then going out not knowing anything about them or what their life is like, and building up a community where you're known and know others and can be together. To sum up, I think that this language of feelings, if you like, is part of emotional development, when we've been very held back on that front in the church. And I think emotional development is an absolute necessity for spiritual development. So I know it's only a tiny seed, if you like, that idea of growing our awareness, but I think it's a seed, but where it takes us will be the something new.
And okay, do any questions come up from the from Zoom?
I think Claire
would like to ask a question. Yeah.
First of all, Penny, thank you. But you are dealing with, I'm sure you'll agree, very sensitive emotions and feelings in your talk, and I'd like to be reassured that there's some safety around this for people in the audience. And I think, I don't know if you agree with this is my question really, the trouble with the synod in the Catholic Church at the moment is people weren't prepared to open up authentically to each other and discuss issues. For example, I went to the Deanery Synod meeting to discuss the Synod in 23, and there is no way on earth would I talk authentically in that context, as I won't here. And the simple reason is because I haven't built up trust. I don't know the people, and you need to do that, I'm sure you'll agree, in the context of a safe environment.
That's right.
Usually in a one-to-one room on your own, where you feel you're held.
Yeah,
thank you.
No, I think that's a really good question, because what I'm thinking, I don't know. I'm thinking that kind of safety is something that Root and Branch needs to create for itself. You know, it's not reinventing the wheel. Other people have done it before. I remember a nun in the 70s, Dodie Donnelly, who came to talk and visit. She'd written a book and tried to bring the idea of team ministry, it was in the States, how you do that. So being a community is really about establishing shared agreement about boundaries and safety. And I think that's a task that has to be done collectively, so that people are aware, and that we're not afraid to pick up on something that somebody hasn't understood about what safety is. I think it's all to be learned, and I think there'll be plenty of people in the Root and Branch community who are familiar with doing that in the context of their work or whatever they've done before. But I do think that's a really good point, and it's a job for the list.
Yeah, thank you very much, Penny. We've got somebody online who wants to ask a question. Jacinta, are you able to ask your question? And then we'll ask somebody in the room. Okay.
Hi, thank you. Lovely to see you, Penny. Sorry, I'm in my sick. I would love to have been there with you. My question really is there anything, and it really is an open question, is there anything we can do as laity to support priests to grow up or to influence the way they're trained to be allowed to grow up themselves?
Yes, that's a good question, isn't it? I have to say that my very, very limited experience last year, I was absolutely shocked by the lack of social skills and interpersonal skills that the priests I had to deal with had. Forgive me, the two Tonys and anybody else who's here ordained. No, I'm sorry. It was shocking, and I think priests have got a lot to say about their training and what they were not shown or taught. Whether they would welcome laity breaching that difference and asking them about their difficulties, I'm not sure, because I've never, we don't know. But I think it's always good to keep in mind that the ordained priests, often parish priests, are in the same position as the rest of us, and with the same difficulties, with the added, you talked about the loneliness in later life and so on. I think priests have been treated shockingly by the church authorities, and they're now lost in a world that's shifted and changed so quickly, and they've given their life to something, it's a priest did say to me last year, it's imploding. I don't think there's any harm in asking them. This is the kind of thing I mean about coercive control. We've not been used to having permission of speaking up. We wait to be spoken to. Which of us would be able to say to somebody that we knew, now, Father, is there anything you want to talk to me about? Yes, you see, it's funny because we can't imagine it, because we never done it. And that's the thing, we've never done it, because the coercive control has stopped us having the experience and learning by experience and building up our skills so that we can set boundaries, set safety limits, help out people that we see in difficulties, and have agency ourselves. That's what we've got to get hold of. That's empowerment, agency, get it done.
Right.
Sorry, I've got to.
There's a question here. Spike, have you? Thank you very much. Thank you. And then
just like that. It's not actually a question. All I was going to say was the point that you made, which is very important, about people feeling free to give their innermost thoughts. I was involved at the beginning of ACTA, and we were specifically set up to provide a safe place for dialogue, and it was assumed that you did not break any of the confidences which we expressed to each other, and you could retell experiences, but no names, no nothing. And we were all, under every meetings to begin with, everyone was assured that nothing would be said outside the meeting which in any way identified people who wouldn't have felt free other than in a safe place. And it worked.
Thank you.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear.
We're now going to try a question online, if we've got anyone with a question online. Okay, so we can now have... we are thinking about whether we should go to breakout rooms. Penny, would you like breakout rooms? Because I think there are more questions coming up.
I'm happy with whatever you want.
Okay, what do you think?
I sense we want to stay here.
Yeah, okay.
So thanks, Penny.
Right.
Yeah, whatever you like.
Okay. Tony, okay. Thanks.
More of an observation than a question. Penny's talked about feelings, individuals, and their situation in groups, and it raises the question in my mind what that group is. We've talked about the family, we've talked about the church, we've talked about safe spaces, but the groupings that we form as humans and the ones we belong to are all quite diverse. They're very different. So people have bad feelings, bad experiences in the church, but this can also happen in workplaces, in all sorts of family, community groups that people belong to. And I think there's probably a more work to be done on what we might find in organizational behavior theory as to what sort of grouping or organizations we belong to and what our relationship and behaviors are. Because we talk about root and branch as a community, but is it a community? Is it an association? It's not a business, we're told, because we can't, we have all these problems with the bank accounts. But we need to, we're talking about the church as though it's a family, but if we're talking about the parish, is the parish a family? Is it a community? Is it an association? So, and our relation to that and what we expect and how we expect to be treated is probably different depending on how we see those human affiliations.
Yes, I think we're not a family, but we feel like a family. I think that's the thing that often binds us together. And I don't know the answer to that, because I think that's parts of the evolution of root and branch, isn't it? To really be actually clearer about what kind of groupings you want. Is it just an online? Are there local groups that would be open to people and so on? But I take your point, Tony.
Pippa's next, I think. Yeah. So thank you.
I'm in Root and Branch and in Quo, Catholic Women's Ordination, and an actor. And I think one of the ways in which I've coped, because I believe that I'm quite attached to my parish, and what I've discovered recently is that I was choosing the people that I spoke to about some of the stuff I felt about those things. And it was actually really quite healing that when we had several meetings in our parish about the synod, and we were in small groups, at the top of the list in every group, people talked about women's ordination. So how blind was I that I was making assumptions about my group? And though some of the parishioners I did speak to, I should have done far more talking with my parish family.
Any more questions online? Okay, several questions here. So, yeah, Canon Lawyer, please. Canon Lawyer, yeah, Nanny behind you. It's okay. You want to go on?
One of the things I feel does damage with feelings and has done is confession and the obsession with sin. Is that people can't distinguish between feelings. I think you brought this up. And what is good or bad, or can I allow myself to even feel this? And I have spiritual direction, and I know there are people in the room who are spiritual directors. And I feel this is such a powerful thing for me, is I can just talk about how I feel in relation to what's going on in my life and in relation to my relationship with God. And it must be the same for priests. They have confession regularly. Do they have spiritual direction which is separate from that? And would that be a good thing?
Yeah, interesting. Can I come back on the feelings as well? Because in saying to you that feelings are initially morally neutral, what we do with them isn't. That's the thing. And I think what I feel about the importance of knowing how we feel is it makes us much better decision makers. There's such a gap between what we feel and what we actually can decide or not decide to do. I think that's incredibly freeing. You know, that's where all the moral and ethical, spiritual questions come up. But we can't actually be responsible for what we feel. We can just let it go. And when we let it go, then we can start to think what to do about it. But you might do nothing with it.
Okay.
Or you might, you know, make a monumental decision.
Okay.
And I don't know the answer to that.
There's a couple of questions online now, I think, so I'll let Mary Barley answer those.
Maureen Slattery Marsh, it'd be lovely if you could ask your question.
I found myself, just taking a risk to offer a reflection, really. I identified a lot with what was just shared by Penny and about the sort of the emotional illiteracy and the estrangement from feeling states that I've grown up with as a Catholic, an Irish Catholic, and then trained as a therapist and a spiritual accompanier. But I find myself in this bind very often in meetings where I'm stuck between knowing my place, because that's what I've always been told in the hierarchy of things, and then knowing my state of being and state of feelings, and the dissonance and the conflict that arises is somewhere that I can get stuck, and I think we probably do in ourselves. What helps me is to know what my model of church is, to go back to the church as the people of God and the community, and then how safe I might feel there. And like others, I have to make choices about who I would confide in. And I just see this huge gulf between, the clergy and the priests whom we care about, but are in a kind of an enclave and huddle and seek support, and I think that's come up in the chat as well, seek support and consolation through their fellowship together, because that feels safe and it's an us and them kind of situation. So ways we can build the bridges between them is through more informal groups and presenting ourselves as non-threatening and coming to terms, if the more at home we are with ourselves, with our own emotional feeling states, and recognize them as true to who we are, then the better. But we do get stuck between this knowing your place and then befriending and growing in your state of being and as a beloved child of God and person of God. Sorry, am I blocked again? Yeah. So it's more a reflection that this is the growing up that we have to do to find our voice and be empowered, because it's quite scary when you're moving and transitioning and you find yourself regressing back into that. You've been told where your place is in the church and where you should belong, and then to step out and then keep stepping out.
Thank you.
Right. Do we have any more questions online before we...
No.
Okay, Kevin, if Kevin would like to ask a question.
Thank you, Penny. I have a question that's like an eternal question for me. We have these dogmas, doctrines, rules that was put into me, as you said, from a very young age. But I have my personal authenticity, how I feel. It rubs up against that. And it's an eternal toing and froing between those two. When I think about the doctrines and dogmas, I can think, do I leave, do I stay? I just get into a jumble of thoughts. But my feelings, as you say, are authentic. So this paradox, to get some peace from that, how I resolved it was just grieving. What I thought was there isn't there. There's a loss. The church that I thought did exist now doesn't. It's not what I thought it was. And it's been grieving that got me through to that. It's just a question about grief. Is this part of this process to give us some peace from this eternal toing and froing? Do I leave, do I stay, do I leave, do I stay?
Yeah. I think it is, because what it is giving up hope that the church will, the official church, the church authorities will change themselves. You know, the hope is that if we, there's a certain hope, if we stay in there, then we're going to get the kind of church that looks like a sort of ideal church that we're holding inside us. But I don't know what you feel about the evidence that the church itself wants to change itself. I mean, Flannery talked about that, you know, that, and it was talked about yesterday how Vatican II was squashed down when it was all there. You know, trust your conscience was the message of Vatican II. You know, be free. But it was something else. You know, come to maturity and responsibility and trust your conscience. And it wasn't allowed to be. And I think grieving is the point at which you give up hope. You go through a process of giving up hope that what you ultimately would like to go back to or have happen isn't going to happen. So something else has to happen, which you create yourself. And I think that's very difficult. You know, it's that point of empowerment of the self where you make the leap. You know, you've made the leap. Somebody else might make a leap the other way, wanting to stay there and really work with the church authorities to help them to see that they need to change. It'd be individual, but I think it's a loss, and nothing changes without loss. So grief follows loss.
So I just wanted to ask, I know you people wanted to ask questions and you will get a chance, but I'm just going to do a bit of a personal witness. I've moved into the Immaculate Heart community, which is non-canonical, because they had to make a decision, and there's somebody else here in this group who's in that. When the Cardinal said you have to do what I say or leave, 300 of them left, and their community survives, the Community Without Walls in Los Angeles. And we're going to try and bring it over here because I can't carry on waiting 60 years for my ministry to be acknowledged. I can't do it. So there's a grief, but there's alternative routes. That's all I wanted to say. But I mustn't let's talk too much because I know other people want to ask questions and you want to. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. There's people here too.
Yeah, we have a question online from Jim Potts. Are you there, Jim? Oh, yes.
I am indeed. Just a question to you, Penny, about the feelings. You were talking about feelings. To what extent have you found that your feelings or feelings of others that you've seen and given therapy to, or been in a therapeutic situation, to what extent have you found feelings are connected with what you or they think or have thought versus just being there?
I'm not sure I understand. Can you say a bit more?
Oh, okay. I got the understanding that you were making a distinction between thinking and feeling. The feelings just being there, and the thinking being something different. Whereas I suppose my experience and my knowledge is more that behind feelings is some form of thinking, either the present or the past, in terms of habitual thinking, which creates the feeling, or leads to, or it triggers the feeling.
Yes, no, I understand, I think, now what you're saying. And I think it's a chicken and egg, really, about what comes first and what comes after. Obviously, feelings and thoughts are connected, but in the Western world, we're very thought-centred, thinking. And things, wanting things to be sort of logical and rational. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make. We've lost touch with thinking that we can we can go on a bit of an expedition of exploration by thinking about our feelings and wondering about them and wondering where they come from. And that's why that shift from, oh dear, I'm feeling that, to, oh, I'm feeling that, how interesting. It is so absolutely crucial. And we're so used to judging, making a judgment, aren't we? Because I would go on to say that in some ways, in the room, when you're seeing somebody, there are moments that very much feel what we would call in Catholic language the presence of the Holy Spirit. Something that isn't me and it isn't you, but is happening somewhere in the space between us. And I think often, we can't, how can I put this, we can't always rely on our feelings to guide us absolutely to reality, because they need considering, don't they, before you act on them. But certainly, I think sometimes we get in touch with the nudges of conscience through our feelings. That's what Richard Rohr was talking about. And even if it's just a little bit, it's another bit of power. It's another bit of taking back control after we've had so many years of being told what to do. It's a new thing, I think. So what I'm thinking is, I feel like a messenger from another world, right? That I've come from this working world. I don't really know where you are in your world, but there are some things to think about that we already know about. And if you wanted to think about them and do something with them in this community, then I think things would start to change and find a direction. Some of the things I've said you won't agree with or not like. But, the points that have come up are all not necessarily nudges of conscience, but nudges in a direction. Your point about making boundaries and making safeties, and be sure that if we're talking together, it doesn't go anywhere else. It doesn't become a piece of gossip for somebody else or whatever. I think in any group, but especially this one, where you're being asked to hold something new coming through, it's a big responsibility and quite a daunting one, I'm sure. That's another feeling, daunting, yeah? But I think, the task is yours. I do think that the change for the future lies with what you concede from this, that others can pick up when our time here has finished. And could I say also to the people who have suffered pain and disappointment and trauma because of how the church has treated you, there's also a resurrection there, because you've gone through that, but that has given you the insight that change is absolutely necessary. You become the leaven in the loaf. And it's also given you the energy to be here. So out of that darkness and suffering, something is moving. And it's just, I think, a question of how you keep it going.
Thank you, Penny. Thanks for that, Penny. Have we got time for another couple of questions? I think you've been waiting, Janet, and then Ollie. Yeah.
Thank you. Penny, in some ways I found your description of the church a bit old-fashioned.
Yes, I am, I think.
I mean, one of the perennial problems, I think, is the immaturity of the laity as well as the immaturity of the clergy. And I think if we were prepared as laity to treat our priests as human beings, to befriend them, not to father them. I mean, I think it would do a great deal if we dropped all ecclesiastical titles.
Yes.
I'm not prepared to call some 25-year-old father, I'm afraid. He could be my grandchild. And the loneliness of the priests, particularly now when they have no one else to live with, is just extraordinary. We're asking them to be celibate, we're asking them to have no families, we're asking them to live alone. And we need to go in and talk to them.
Yes.
And treat them as grown-ups. And be prepared to say, not to go muttering around among ourselves, your father won't do this, that and the other. Go and say, you know,
yes,
get your finger out,
take
do
action.
something.
Yes, take action.
One of the worries with the synodal process was how many priests were unprepared to take part in it. They said, oh, people won't tell the truth. Well, you know, you tell the truth. I mean, we had, personally, anecdotal, we were having a diocesan meeting and the bishop was there and he came to the table and we were discussing something, I can't remember what. And somebody said, I think you said, didn't you? David said, what do you think? And he said, oh, I'm just here to listen. And without thinking, I said, this is nonsense.
Yeah.
Not good enough.
It's not good enough.
Good.
You don't have to speak as bishop, but and to do him justice, he started talking. Then he went around and he actually talked in the other. And I think we need to do much more of this.
No, I think absolutely, and I'm glad that you were able to do that, and that's what I think about. I mean about acquiring. If we don't have the confidence to do that, acquiring the skills. And I also take your point about being old-fashioned, because I think that generational shifts in the church and the experience of one generation is often not the same as another. I certainly grew up when the church was very different from what you feel now, but I do feel it hangs about. But I take your point. Having the confidence to do that. You see, again, coming back to coercive control and that little bit in us, have we got that confidence? And if we haven't got that confidence, then there are all sorts of ways of learning how to be more confident for doing that. Again, we've probably got the skills in the group. I wouldn't be averse, for example, to, having doing a short, somebody presenting from the group, a short course on assertion. Because we've got some very odd ideas about putting ourselves forward from coercive control, but also not wanting to be rude. This is the thing. And I was going to ask you whether, because this is a good test as well of that inner self, if you were in a gathering where there were going to be prayers shared, would you always ask the priest to lead it? Because it could feel inside incredibly rude not to, on one level. But, you actually took the equality to the priest by switching around and saying, actually, no, that won't do. And I think those are the kind of skills that those of you who want to still, do your best for the church would like to have, and maybe could have. So I think it's a really important point you raised, and well done for saying it. No, it's good. Your little bit of coercive control is not as powerful as perhaps as others.
Okay.
Well done.
We've got time for one.
Now,
one more short.
The lady next to Sue.
Online.
Sue.
Sorry. Online.
Yeah.
Go on, Mary.
Excuse me,
Mary
you've been waiting ages.
Yeah, no, can I say that we've had someone waiting online for quite some time?
Yeah.
Let's ask Margaret Mary Moore to ask your short question, please, Margaret Mary.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to follow up with what Kevin spoke about, the grieving. I think the grieving is Jesus crying within us because he has given us so much, his own self and this church. And if we can cry and grieve, I think it's a very healthy thing, because it shows that we are in touch with our Savior and what he's done for us, and the fact that we wouldn't walk away. And I think that we see so many in authority who would never grieve and cry about how our church has been hijacked, or how there's been an abuse of power, or what I would call spiritual malpractice. And so I think that our tears are being heard by the Lord, because you only grieve for who you love. And we do love, and we love each other as the people of God. And so I think there's resurrection at the end if we don't give up, because I think it's the Lord's own tears that we're shedding, and that he wants to give us the courage to go forward, and he will be with us, and he is our healing presence. He is our hope. He is the whole reason that we're here. And I promote the book, Becoming Human Together, by Jerome Murphy O'Connor. And he said, the church is the critical instrument for social change in the world. And if we look at what we've been given, I can truly say that we have to stick with this, and Jesus is with us, because we are that critical instrument, and we can offer healing. And I think our being together is a healing presence. Thank you.
Margaret Mary, thank you so much. What a note to end on. Grieving is Jesus crying within us, and we're in touch with our Saviour. I'm going to hand over to Sue to give final thanks to Penny, who's run a marathon. Thank you so much for staying with us.
I really want to say how grateful I am for you having me today. I know I'm bringing something very different from what the usual meetings are about, but I've really appreciated your contributions, and I want to thank you. Thank you.
Well, I attempted to say thank you to Penny already, but interrupted her, so I'm sorry about that, because you had so much more to say. And in fact, as the questions came through, it all emerged that you were able to contribute a lot more. And I actually don't know how to thank you, but I know that we will all take a lot from what we've heard, and possibly try and work something out as the year goes on. I was present when Penny spoke 20-odd years ago to a Catholic People's Week, when people were quite traditional and quite elderly, and it transformed them. So I hope that we've taken some transformation from what you've said, and thank you once again, Penny.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, Catherine's going to help us to end the session.
Before I start anything that might resemble a traditional prayer, I just want to say I'm very conscious that a lot of emotions have been expressed and heard, and to say to people over lunch, if you need a hug or you just need to reach out to somebody, please do. And I hope that's all right to say that, or get a walk in the grounds if that's what you need to do. I'm also going to leave the lovely singing bowl on Penny's table, because if you need to get any emotions or just respond to something, please just take a moment and hold it, because this is something that Buddhists have used for millennia to bring their thoughts and feelings, and it is a singing bowl, but it can sing many emotions. So I would just give it a short doing, and then we just have a moment to hold what we've heard, that is positive for us, but also to let go of things that might have been challenging, or to hold what is a niggle that we maybe need to take somewhere further because we've been challenged. And we give thanks for what we've heard, for what we've listened to, for how we've connected. And as a sign of our being together, perhaps we could just, in a moment before we go to lunch, hold our hands out to one another in the room and also hold our hands out to the Zoomers as a blessing and a thanksgiving that we are here together as the Root and Branch community. Amen.
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 Thank you, Catherine.